Title is distributed databases, but a lot of concepts that we'll talk about and see code for, they are common for any system which needs to store data on multiple servers. And we'll probably see what the examples look like. So databases, the standard ones like Cassandra, HBase, and others. But there are other components, starting from infrastructure components like Kubernetes and etcd, or message brokers like Kafka, file systems like Safe and HDFS, and even actor systems like Akka, which provide stuff like clustering and Akka persistence. A lot of building blocks of these systems are exactly the same. I mean, even the code-wise, if you see those building blocks, they are exactly the same, with few variations here and there. And we'll see what the building blocks look like. And there are these 6 things that we need to take care of, or we need to have solutions for whenever we say that data needs to be distributed on multiple servers.
Hey, Unmesh, just to interrupt, can you do a full screen presentation?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that. Is this better?
This actually we are not able to see it. I mean, I'm not able to see at all.
Oh, okay.
No, it is being presented.
It's presented, right?
Yeah,
Can everyone see it?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
can see.
Cool. Okay.
Okay. So when we have data on multiple servers, or we have multiple servers coordinating on storing data, as I said, there are these 6 things that we need to take care of. The first is group membership, and group membership is for every server to know which all other servers are part of this system. And the cluster size can really vary from few nodes, like in case of Zookeeper-like systems, or CD-like systems, which is say 3 to 5 nodes, to something like Consul or Cassandra or Akka servers, which can be thousands of nodes storing that data. And when you have this kind of system built for this kind of scalability, like you can have thousands of nodes which can be part of your system, then we essentially need to have dynamic configurations that this kind of discoverability to figure out essentially as basic things as what is the IP address and port of each of those nodes. And the other thing that we need to know is know if something fails, if a server is down for some reason. And then failure detection becomes like a very critical component of these systems, that we have to reliably know and quickly enough if a server is down, so that we can take some corrective actions. I mean, the server which are up can take some corrective actions. So this is the first component of anything that's distributed, and we saw examples here. So all these frameworks, systems, databases, file systems, they have this component for group membership and failure detection. The second important piece is replication, because one of the reasons to have data distributed is essentially to be fault tolerant, that even if like few or one server goes down, the client of the system should be able to work and have that data available and should be able to work with data. So replication becomes critical. There are essentially a couple of models or architectural styles of how replication can work, and choosing one of that then is a critical thing. Defines the architecture of your system as a whole. Third is about partitioning. And partitioning is when I said you have this like thousands of nodes or multiple nodes storing data. It's not that all the data is replicated on all the nodes, because one of the other reasons apart from availability for distributing data is that that of scale. So you should be able to store and process data which doesn't fit necessarily on one box. So when you have say terabytes and petabytes and exabytes of data, you need to split it and store on multiple machines and process on multiple machines as well. This also gives you performance because then like on each node you can process smaller chunks of data. So partitioning scheme becomes extremely critical and need to have some design for that. And we'll see what that is. The fourth is about storage, that we split this data on multiple machines, but how that's stored on the disk or in files, that becomes a problem to be solved. And then fifth and sixth are you can say they're similar, but consistency, because we are storing now data on multiple servers when we replicate. What is the guarantee that we provide to our clients that when they write something and then read something, what data they will see? Do they see the latest update, or there can be a stale data that's visible to them, and that's from the client's perspective. And even between two servers, if while copying data there are some failures, how to make sure that all the replicas remain in consistent state. So that becomes a very important problem to be solved. And consensus is, I would say, a special case of this consistency implementation. But I have that as a separate point because some of the systems like Zookeeper and etcd, they guarantee consensus. I mean, they're based around consensus, and they give the strictest consistency guarantee called linearizability. And those systems are designed slightly differently than the other ones. So these are the 6 things. So you see any database code or database, or as I said, like Kafka code or Kubernetes code or Akka code or Safe code. You will essentially see code that solves these 6 problems. And we'll see now one by one how they are solved. So at very high level, these when we say distribute on multiple servers, there are 2 styles of architectures. One is peer-to-peer, and so server itself is responsible for managing its own membership and own failure detection, and it doesn't depend on any other external entity for any of the coordination tasks. And the examples of these are Cassandra primarily as a database, but even systems like Akka, Actor Cluster, they are peer-to-peer systems. And this is like a major class of databases or stateful systems. They follow peer-to-peer design. The other style is to use an external consensus cluster and then have a data cluster which is separate, but for some of the coordination tasks and metadata storage, this external cluster is used. And this is also, there are a lot of systems which follow this style because it solves or it reduces some of the complexity in the cluster design itself, and we'll see how. The primary example of this is Kafka, Kubernetes, or even HDFS kind of systems, which use Zookeeper or etcd kind of external stores, which are consensus. Which do consensus within that small cluster. So this is the other style which you will see in any database. So mainly databases follow these two, and databases, when I say I'm using the term interchangeably, like any system that stores data on multiple machines. Now we'll see how the group membership is implemented. So we saw those 6 things. We'll start with group membership implementation. And group membership, again, 2 styles, and we'll see each of those 6 things, how they are implemented in these 2 styles of architectures. So when we have this external linearizable store or external consistent store that is used, any node in the data cluster, when it starts, it registers itself to this external store. So in case of Kafka, or in case of, I think HBase as well does the same, they will have this Zookeeper cluster, which is external. And every node that starts, it registers itself to that Zookeeper. And then Zookeeper will always have the complete list of all the available brokers. And whoever wants to know what all nodes are part of the existing cluster and which nodes are all live, they will get it from Zookeeper. There are some callbacks that essentially all these external server libraries give you, that any new node that gets added, you will get a callback. So in these databases, you will typically have one of the nodes. So let's say you have 3 nodes or 1,000 nodes. You will have one of the nodes that always takes this responsibility of always listening to all the events from this external store. Like in case of Kafka, it's or HBase, it's Zookeeper, and then react to that. Or use that for taking certain decisions like partitioning or assigning partitions and stuff like that. And we'll see now in code how it looks like. So this is the test that I have with embedded Zookeeper. But essentially you will have, when I say in case of Kafka or in case of other databases, it will be different. But in case of Kafka, it's a broker that you register, and this broker is nothing special. By the way, the code is Scala, but I think it should be easy enough. So the class I have is in the context of Kafka, but it's nothing but just the ID of the node, the identity of the server which is registering, and the IP address, which is the host name, and the port. So there is nothing special to start with. And everyone registers itself to this Zookeeper with its IP address and port. Now I have hard-coded IP address and port here, but it will be whatever is the IP address and port of that particular server. And maybe I can show you more complete example, but yeah, so essentially you will have your server, main method of your server class, like in case of Kafka or Zookeeper, sorry, Kafka or HBase or anything, which will register self, and register self is essentially just whatever is the IP address and port for your server. You will register it in Zookeeper. And then whoever has callback registered with Zookeeper will get that callback invoke, and you will see what is the latest state of that. So again, this is ignore that code because it's a complete controller code in Kafka. But as you can see, this is the controller class, and so one of the brokers, which is elected as a leader, will register for broker change listener, and then essentially after the callback is invoked, you will see that it gets all the live brokers as size 3 because we registered 3 brokers, including itself. So I have this test utils wait until true here because the callbacks happen asynchronously. So in this your main thread, you have to wait till this condition is true, or you use timeout maybe after 1 second. So this is how the code will be whenever you use any external transaction store, in this case Zookeeper, but etcd will be similar. Etcd has a concept of it's a key value store. So you will store say broker ID as key, and then IP address and port as the value. The other part of this, so this is just the basic. So what this gives you is basic discoverability, that you have all the servers in your cluster discoverable by through this external smaller server. The other important aspect, as I said, that along with group membership, is that of failure detection. So just discovering what the IP address and port is not enough, but we also need to know when a particular node goes down. And Zookeeper has this concept of...
Unmesh,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I have a quick question.
Sure.
So in this code, the sequence that you have written is like first create the Zookeeper client and then say register broker and then create the server. Is that sequence
No, okay,
really matters, or should we like first create
no,
the server?
ignore that. This is just a stub passed to the controller, so that's not really a server.
Okay.
Yeah, Zookeeper client is just a library that's used from within your server. So if you look at a more complete test, if you are starting 5 brokers like this, and this may be right now they are in the same JVM for the test purpose, but they can very well be separate processes. And when they start, they will have a Zookeeper client in them through which they will register themselves. So you can imagine this to be what I have highlighted, each startup method as a main method of your Java class, of your server, Java class of your server. So, so I was talking about the failure detection piece of it, and Zookeeper particularly has this concept of ephemeral nodes. And what we mean by ephemeral nodes is every client is will maintain a connection to Zookeeper when you use the client library of Zookeeper, and Zookeeper will track when the connection drops. And if any connection to the client drops, or essentially there is no heartbeat from the client to Zookeeper, Zookeeper will consider that this particular node has failed because it can't connect with Zookeeper. And then it will remove this node that was created by this client. So in this case, let's say I register, actually this is better. So if let's say this broker one is registered and these 5 brokers are registered or 5 servers are registered, and then one goes down, then the ephemeral node for this, which was created, or the key value, essentially we can talk in key value terms as well for people who don't know of Zookeeper working. So essentially the key value that was registered with Zookeeper, that will go away after the connection drops. And you, again, whoever has registered for the callback will get a callback. So that the controller will know that some node has failed. So I have this a little more end-to-end test. By the way, this code is available on GitHub. And I will, I think, share the link maybe by the end of the talk, so that, and you can set this up in your IntelliJ and should be able to run all these tests as well. The code is in Scala, but I think it's fairly straightforward to, I mean, it's the code looks very Java-like, even if it's Scala. Scala is mostly for convenience. But if you see the code, that if my broker one shuts down, and shuts down is essentially just closing the connection with Zookeeper, just a simulation of a crash, let's say, or a pause. And then what happens is, because the controller had registered for the callback, they will see that the controller, the live broker size is now 2, and they will know also which broker has failed, so that they can take corrective actions. Again, I will just run this test for the sake of showing it works, but you can always try it yourself. Yeah, I mean, the test pass, that means this asset works. And this has some other things as well, like leader follower, which we'll talk about in some time. But that's what happens when you have databases or stateful systems which use external cluster for storing group membership, and also do failure detection using that. Now this I showed again with Zookeeper, and particularly with taking example of, let's say, Kafka. But the same will happen even with HDFS or HBase, or also with Kubernetes. And Kubernetes uses etcd as an external store, so it's not Zookeeper, but exactly for the same reasons and for same purpose. So this is one way of now doing group membership. The other architectural style that we talked about some time back is that of gossip protocol. So we said it's like, sorry, not gossip protocols, peer-to-peer systems. So in peer-to-peer systems like Cassandra or Akka, there is no external entity like Zookeeper or etcd which you can you rely on for any of this group membership or metadata storage. And what these systems then do for solving this group membership and failure detection problem is they use gossip protocol. And We'll talk of gossip protocol a bit now and see also in code how that works. So gossip protocol is based on a theory called epidemiology, and that's the theory and science of studying how epidemics spread in a population. So like coronavirus thing case you take, how quickly a coronavirus kind of epidemic can span the entire population, so that everyone is impacted. And the study of that is called epidemiology. Now for viruses like corona spread, that's a bad thing. But in case of large clusters, the same can be used for your benefit, because as the theory shows, once few people get infected and there is a constant communication that's happening with random set of peoples, it's generally very fast that everyone in your vicinity, everyone in your population will get infected. Now, in case of gossip, essentially infection in case of your virus case is getting infected with the virus. In case of server systems, essentially it's the data that is passed from one node to other. And in case of this gossip protocol, when it's used for membership, it's essentially like your IP address and port with the server ID, along with some other data. Like in case of Cassandra, there is this concept of a token that's passed. So all this reaches your entire cluster pretty quickly. Now we can look at a very nice simulator that that Consul has. So Consul is a HashiCorp product, which is used for configuration and again group membership for your microservices cluster. But it uses gossip protocol, and they have this very nice simulator which says if your gossip interval is, let's say, some seconds, and you can configure that, and the fan out is 3 nodes, that means each node talks to 3 other nodes, and your cluster size is let's say by default is 30, but you can give it like 1000 as well. And you can configure like X number of nodes you expect to fail with, say, network instability with some loss of packets, and how quickly your gossip will reach all the cluster members. And if you see, like even for your 1000 node cluster, and I can increase this to, because Consul is used with, like, say, I think up to 6000 nodes in production. So you say 5000 nodes, and it reaches all the nodes pretty quickly, like within say 8 seconds. And that's when your gossip interval, like every 1 second, you speak to or you send messages to 3 random nodes. If you make it 0.5, like every 500 milliseconds you send it, your convergence is a lot quicker. And even with some percent of message loss, like 10% packets get lost, even then it's pretty fast. And you can say 10% nodes fail, and with 10% packet loss, even then it's pretty fast. So within, say, 3 seconds, if it's every 500 milliseconds you send the gossip, it will reach the entire population of your cluster. And now we'll see this in action. So I have this small test here, like similar to what I had, like objects representing servers. Here there are like these 4 objects or 4 servers that I start, and eventually they will have metadata about everyone else because they are doing gossip internally. So if I run this test, yeah, so the test passes. So I've given like pretty high timeout here, but that's because of my system. So within a few seconds, you saw that all these servers, they figured out each other. And we can and if you try this out, you will see these kind of messages going across with say tokens and some other things, and we'll see why tokens, particularly in case of Cassandra, they are used. But if we see how the gossip, and this I'm explaining gossip protocol in Cassandra. The gossip protocol in Voldemort, or in case of etcd, Voldemort is like not used anymore, but etcd and Akka, they are slightly different. But in case of Cassandra, this works with like a 3-way handshake between 2 servers. And just I will quickly high level talk about this, but for the gossip to start, you always need one server which is well known. So all the other servers, they don't need to know about each other, but everyone needs to know about one node so that they can join the cluster, and that node is called as seed node. So in case of Cassandra, or in case of Akka, or any other system which uses gossip, you need this one node which is a seed node. And every server, when they start gossip, they send the first message telling this seed, or telling like for gossip, you don't need to be a seed node to talk to, but the first communication happens with seed node, and then the same happens with every other node. So they send the ID of the node for which this node has any information, and in response, what this other node does is it figures out that this request doesn't contain peer 1, which is the name of this node. So it sends back the information about peer 1 and asks for information for peer 2, because it says in my hash map or my metadata store, I don't know about peer 2. And in the third message from peer 2, then it accepts this message and says that, okay, peer 1 information is sent to me. In its own metadata store, it will store peer 1 and token 1 that is passed to it. And then it will send its own information, like this. Sorry, I have this map wrong, but if you see the bottom of it, so its own information is this peer 2 token 2. So that information is sent to this node. So at the end of this 3 message handshake, both these servers have the same information, and this continues for this continues continuously, essentially every 1 second, every 500 milliseconds, whatever is the configured interval. This kind of message exchange will happen with random set of nodes, and as we saw, eventually, like each node will know about everyone else, and it's critical that you reach this kind of a stable state that everyone knows about everyone for other functionality then to work, like partitioning and replication to work. It's critical that whoever is partitioning, the client, or whoever is replicating, they know about all the other servers. So it's important that system reaches this stable state, but that happens pretty quickly, like in few seconds. So I think I'm running a bit slow, but I'll quickly cover the next piece, which is partitioning. And partitioning, we'll see, like in case of Cassandra, how it happens. It's essentially very easy concept. So you like most of these distributed data stores, they are essentially key value stores, or they need your client or your message or a record which is persisted to have a well-defined key. Like even Kafka messages do have that kind of a key. And why that key is needed is the destination for that record is computed from that key. So if you like in case of Cassandra, what happens is something like this: that each node is assigned an integer value, and whenever you put any record, which is, let's say you have a key and then a record with a set of values, an integer is computed from that key, and then within this set of integers, like in this case, node 1 has integer 1, node 2 has integer 10, and node 3 has integer 20 as the token numbers assigned to them. Then it figures out if token for K1, key 1 is 15, it should go to one of these nodes. So anything between 10 to 20 go on this node. Anything beyond 20 will always go on node 1. And anything between 1 to 10 will go on this node. So it's important that the token numbers which are assigned are not so simple, like 1 to 20. They are generally randomized MD5 hashes converted into integers. That's how it is done in Cassandra, so that they are sparsely distributed. It's not like 1 to 110, 20, because in this case, what will happen is anything above 20 will always go on node 1, and that will be overpopulated. But essentially, this is how it works. And if you see the code, it's really simple code. So just to simulate what happens is, let's say you have through this gossip, you got metadata about all the nodes, and you know that there are 3 nodes in the cluster, and the integer assigned to these nodes is 1, 10, and 20. Then whenever I get any key, essentially I just convert that key into integer by taking its hash and converting it to integer. And then just use something like this. So Java collections have this method called binary search. And what it tells you is you can pass it a set of integers. And for a given number, it tells you what is the place in this array that number should go. So if you see, like for 21, you pass, it will tell you that this is the 4th place. So after 20, it should go. If you pass 3, then it will say that it should be in place 2. If you pass 15, it will say that it should be in place 3 in this array. And this is exactly the same code that executes in Cassandra, a similar code. And based on the index, it will know that out of 1, 10, 20, which node or which place this particular key should go. And it essentially just picks up the IP address and port of that number, because it knows that from the group membership, and then sends the record to that that particular node. So this test that I showed, and you can have a look at the code, essentially is doing that it's storing this key 1 value 1 on table 1, and on depending on the hash of that key, one of the nodes will be picked up as a primary of that key. as a primary holder of that key value store, key value, and it will go there. So that's about partitioning. Essentially, similar thing happens in every, like even in Kafka or every database store. The other,
so sorry.
yeah.
So I think this was like very important because in distributed systems, the nodes can come and go, and that's why they use something called as a consistent hashing. Is this?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, yes. So if you see what's in the Cassandra code base, and I can show, it's essentially something like this. The token is each member is assigned, each server is assigned this kind of a token, which is nothing but an MD5 hash converted into. So MD5 hash of a random GUID converted into integer. And then when you go like for any key that you pass, yeah, you essentially just again create a hash for that key, and hash is just MD5 hash. And the same logic is used that I showed with simple integers to. So if you see the same logic, like this is Cassandra code, the earlier version, but a set of tokens and the given token, which is computed from the key that's passed, which is the MD5 hash of the key, and it finds the index, and then based on the index it gets, it gets the IP address and port of the servers, which hold that token. But yeah, as you said, it's important that you pick right numbers and it's consistent hashing, so that load is equally distributed, because otherwise one node will get overloaded. So that's how partitioning works. Again, as I said, similar stuff happens in case of Kafka or other systems. Happen at different places, not with this kind of a token thing. Now the third important point is about replication, and replication again happens with two styles. One is called as leader-based replication, and again there are two smaller variants there, which is like primary backup case and quorum-based replication. But essentially, in this case, what happens is for every partition, there is a single designated leader. So all the requests, like put and get requests for that partition, always go to the same server, and the other servers, which are designated as followers, will periodically pull the data from this leader. Now, this, as said, is a variation. So this particular primary backup kind of a case where followers are responsible for pulling data from the leader. It happens in case of Kafka. In case of other quorum-based systems like consensus implementations, it's the leader which pushes changes to the followers. But essentially, there is a single leader. So all the reads and writes go through this leader, and there are certain important characteristics of that. So strict ordering, for example, it needs to be maintained. That leader is responsible for doing that. The coordination of your different replicas that happen, the leader is responsible, or leader and follower mechanism. It's responsible for making sure that data across all the replicas is consistent. That is eventually every replica gets all the data, latest data, and stronger consistency guarantee is possible because essentially everything goes through the same leader. So you can get stronger consistency guarantees that the latest value you will always get, even in case of leader failure, consistently. And there are mechanisms like commit index or high watermark that are used. We won't go into that detail. Essentially, it's enough to remember that they give you easier to give stronger consistency guarantees with leader follower kind of a design. Plus the coordination of data copying, like making sure that replicas are consistent, is the responsibility of this leader follower, like the database side of things. The other variant now, in case of your peer-to-peer systems like Cassandra, there is no leader. So this kind of systems are called as leaderless systems. And in this case, what happens is, particularly in case of Cassandra, not in the case of other systems, but in Cassandra, you can the client can talk to any of the nodes to put key value, and that particular node then acts as a coordinator, which then redirects the request to the right destination, because it does that same finding the right placeholder for this, right place for this key value based on the token that we just saw, how the partitioning works. And then this coordinator is the one that puts these records on multiple servers based on your replication factor. The main difference now, if you see in case of leader followers and in this case, is if some replication fails, that it just couldn't communicate with one of the servers, or the coordinator itself goes down after copying to just one server, there is no one who is now in control of making sure that all the replicas now are consistent, because there is no leader kind of case. So in this case, what we need to do, sorry, I have, I think, slides reordered, but we need mechanisms like read repairs. So you will know if two peers are inconsistent only when the data is read by someone. And at that time, then what happens is you read, say, multiple versions of your data, and then by reading, you figure out that, okay, one of the servers is lagging behind. Then that read repair needs to happen. So that read request asynchronously then puts this key value in the server which is lacking that value. So those things need to be taken care of. The consistency guarantees are tricky because, as I said, there is no single entity coordinating copying across replicas. We need some mechanism like vector clocks, and I have in my code base a very miniature version of Voldemort database, which primarily uses vector clock. Cassandra doesn't use vector clock; it uses timestamp based last write wins kind of a thing. But what we need to know is, when we read values, we need to know which value is latest and which is stale or which is old, so that you can compare and then do this kind of read repair. So if you see, this node represents just show where this map is. Yeah, okay. So this is this version map kind of a thing you will have, and every key and value. So every value, as you see here, is versioned by a vector clock. So it's not just value, but you always keep a value and a version of it. And version is essentially a vector clock. Now, vector clock, the name might be scary, but it's as simple as, for if you have like 3 nodes, which will have an integer counter for each of those. And whichever node you are storing this value to, the counter corresponding to that node will increase, and that's how it works. So if you store this in, say, node 1, you will always have the value incremented for node 1. If you store it in node 2 first, then the node 2 value will increase, and that way it there are a bunch of tests in this Voldemort code base around this vector clock. So vector clock, if it has like 112 and 112, they are the same vector clocks. But if you have 112 and 1123, that means that 112 happened before 1123. And this kind of value will be kept in every insert. But you need that kind of a mechanism essentially for making sure you attain consistency eventually after doing things like read repair and such. The other important aspect, am I running out of time, Nishant?
No, we'll do it till 11:20. So it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize I had. But other important aspect is about failure detection. And failure detection, as we saw in case of Zookeeper, it was based on the concept of ephemeral nodes, which hides this kind of a heartbeat thing from you. And Zookeeper tells you that when something fails. In case of peer-to-peer, we need to build this kind of failure detector based on the gossips that we are receiving. And one of the so I have this, I think, okay, I think I'll just yeah. So one of the important things to note here is that failure detection essentially happens based on heartbeat. So every gossip that happens updates everyone about the latest state of every node that they know about. Now, there are two variations of how the heartbeats are interpreted in most systems. In smaller clusters, which implement things like Raft or Zookeeper or Zab, which are like not more than, say, 3 to 5 node cluster with a tight network. It's a strict heartbeat that you don't receive heartbeat in, say, 50 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds. It will consider the node to be failed because it's a tight network. It can take that kind of a decision, and it gives you higher availability because you detect maybe falsely, but you take corrective actions after every 100 milliseconds that you don't detect a heartbeat, and then you select something else as a leader and you start functioning. In larger clusters, like Cassandra, let's say you have a 1,000 node cluster, what we need to make sure is that when something is detected as failed, it's really is a failure. And the reason for that is because these databases they store a lot of data, and they take certain corrective actions when they detect a failure. So when Cassandra, for example, detects a failure, it starts a mechanism called as hinted handoff. So if it detects that one of the servers is down, it will start storing the values in a different node. So whatever the coordinator node to which the clients go to, it will start storing the values there. And this then becomes very important that you don't falsely detect something as failed, because the mechanisms then you start are heavyweight mechanisms. And when you have heart beating like after every 500 milliseconds and such, there can be, say, some network glitches or maybe just slow GC, and you might receive heartbeats after, say, a designated time interval. So in that case, you have this called as phi accrual failure detector kind of failure detection used. So you don't mark something as failed immediately after detecting that, say, in 100 milliseconds it didn't receive a heartbeat, but you do that statistically. So there is this case of sampling that happens. So every heartbeat that is received, you create a statistical sampling. So you store up to, say, 1,000 heartbeats, and based on that you predict what the next heartbeat is going to you are going to receive, and this timeout is kind of adjusted dynamically. So this particular phi accrual failure detector is exactly the Cassandra code that I have, and if you see the test, I have one sender and a receiver. And sender is periodically, essentially it has a heartbeat configured, which is periodically sending the heartbeat message to the receiver, and receiver has this phi accrual failure detector configured. So it will detect failure after sender stops sending it any of the heartbeats. So if I run this, so you can again, as I said, look at this code. It's available on GitHub. The benefit of this is that without going into Cassandra code, you can run this kind of a failure detector just by simulating a sender and a receiver. So if you see what happens here is, so it's sampled, it calculates a statistical value called phi based on the last intervals. And then when this goes above a certain threshold, it marked this as failed after it stopped. Yeah, so this is some of the things that needs to be now built because there is no external system. So these are, so I had to cover, I don't know, I think I'm running out of time, but the storage is another important aspect. And most of these key value databases, like most distributed databases, I should say, they are key value. And the storage is something as simple as this this kind of a sequence file. So you see this table read write test. It's a very simple append on the file that that the records go to. So if you see this particular code, right, and this is again, this is not toy code. This is exactly the code that you will see in Kafka or Cassandra code base. So it's a random access file object that you create, and then based on what you need to do, essentially you keep appending key values to this file, and for each key you keep the file offset. So this is another index that is stored. So for each key, what is the file offset at which that key value is stored? And when you read, you can directly go to this offset and get that key. So if you see your table, you are reading this value. So first thing you do is seek to the file position based on the key that you get from this kind of a hash map, which is index that is kept. And if you see this particular test, It's appending a bunch of key values and then reading a bunch of key values again, and you get it. So this is the other aspect of how the storage happens. There are other because it's generally not a single file, but it's a bunch of files. Like you do file segmentation, and also like in case of Cassandra, there is this concept of SS table, where you periodically also merge these sequence files which are stored on the disk. But essentially, it just append on this simple file with index kept for each key what the file position is, and that's what happens in Cassandra and many other key value stores. So these are the common implementation details of distributed databases or any system that stores data in distributed way. Now, if you read any book or documentation, you will see these kind of buzzwords like gossip protocols, Lamport clocks. It's same as what the vector clock that I showed. Essentially, like a list of counters. Log structure storage, which is very similar to the append-only storage that I showed. Then leader-based application, leaderless application, consistency, read repair, consistent hashing, token ring, and consensus like Zookeeper or Zab or etcd. So I think I just tried to cover like a broad spectrum of things that you will see in any distributed database or distributed data system. Feel free to, I will I think, put the GitHub link in the document that Nishad has shared. But feel free to get any questions if you have, even after the talk. I think I've already eaten up like 20 more minutes in my talk. So cool, I'm done.
Cool, thanks, Unmesh. I'll just wait for a few more minutes just so that if anybody has questions that we can cover and they are not able to ask during the talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So coming from a, let's say, not distributed system, like I've been using MySQL, and I was like interested in this distributed database. Like if I want to use a distributed database, like
yeah.
One of the questions that I would ask is like how are transactions supported in distributed database? So how do we handle transactions in distributed database?
Yeah, so transactions, essentially you will have some implementation of consensus. So you need to, or I mean, essentially it's two-phase commit or very simple. Consensus simplistically is similar to two-phase commit, but it's implemented like that. And most these databases don't support it. They do say that they are eventually consistent, so they won't implement two-phase commit or transactions. But it will be two-phase commit essentially that they need to implement. Like Kafka, like again, I'm going to Kafka from databases, but because the implementation is same. Kafka, if you know, now does have implementation of two-phase commit for producers and consumers to support exactly one's delivery guarantee. So even if most standard implementations of databases don't support it, you will need something like two-phase commit that is implemented on distributed databases. And they do, I mean, like Kafka does now. Cassandra does what they call as lightweight Paxos, not for the standard operations, but when you need to do like compare and swap operations on key values, they do have implementation of lightweight Paxos, which is a consensus algorithm.
So there is a concept of three-phase commit also, which has been
yes,
yeah, and this is being used by distributed database to achieve transactions. So that is
Yeah.
being used by, so correct me if I'm wrong, Unmesh, like you can achieve the transactions on row level, or you can say key, particular key store level. So you cannot have a transaction across multiple, if the transaction or the data is being committed to multiple nodes, then it's hard, but you have to pinpoint to, you have to design the
Right.
schema. Yeah.
You will need to, yeah. So like single key value, that will be single key value on a single node will be consistent. Like even with vector clocks, it's made sure that you try to update a stale with a stale version, it will throw exception. Across multiple nodes is what is problematic. Problematic in the sense you will need two-phase commit kind of a thing, two-phase commit, three-phase commit, or Paxos or Raft kind of algorithm that's implemented.
So actually, my question was very
So
simple. So I'd give
you
an
want to ask
example.
how to achieve that is what you are saying.
Yeah, meaning
If your database doesn't support it.
Yeah, I mean, how does this business problems gets translated into like in the actual way of doing things? Like my simple example, let's say I want to implement just a library, okay, and I just want to make sure that okay, if user checks out 2 books at a time, he either checks out 2 books at a time or he doesn't check out or he will not get any book, just to model the transactions. So in MySQL case, it would be like very simple that okay, I want to make sure that I'll put a transaction block around all these two checkout entries, and if either of fails, I will say okay, you will not be able to check out any book. So in case of distributed system, let's say I replace my MySQL with let's say MongoDB or any other distributed database.
That's a Cassandra. Yeah.
Okay, and I want to just implement this case. Is it possible, or how do we do it? What are the other alternatives to go about this?
See, it will be possible in the sense when your requests go to like your big book inventory, let's say for book one is or library one is on one of the nodes. Mm-hmm. Then your subsequent reads and writes will always make sure that you can't, let's say, decrement a value below 0. The problem comes when between your reads and writes, a node goes down and your requests go to other node, and the node went down before replicating data onto other node, and that's when there is a possibility of having this kind of a discrepancy that you check out twice because there you went to other node and it had the counter which was not decremented from your previous operations, and that's the reason you at your database level it will be difficult. It won't be possible actually unless your database itself gives you guarantee that when a particular operation is successful, all my replicas were in consistent state. So in case of failure, you go to other replica, you will always get the last state that you saw with the current replica. Unless that guarantee is there, it's not possible to have this kind of a. So you need to have something around that, probably.
So I would like to add a couple of things here. So I think, hi, this is Pranav. So what you are asking is the question about modeling your use case into a distributed transaction and getting it to work, right? So from what little I know about it, people are slowly moving away from those kind of cases. So the way you model your use case or your business case is in such a way that you either basically go for eventual consistency or convert your business case where it does not depend on a proper transaction in database terminology, as we call it. Right? So there's no easy way, because as soon as you have distributed systems and you have nodes, you run into the CAP theorem. So either you have to say that, okay, some of my nodes go away, I'll just not do the transaction, I'll just not allow the user to do anything. Yeah. Or you say that I'll go for eventual consistency. So to answer your question, there's no easy way out, as Umesh said.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the important thing is that the mental model that we have been like learned needs to be like replaced with this new mental model of doing things, and that will help us gauge or solve these problems in a correct way in distributed database systems.
Agree, totally agree. Yes, we have been used to the case where we just send a transaction to the database and we don't worry, it just either gets done or doesn't get done, and it is no longer as easy as that. So one interesting way to solve that problem, I know, and probably most of you guys already know, it is the Saga's pattern, wherein you don't just have transactions, but each transaction has a sort of an antidote or compensating transaction, as it is called sometimes. So if you have a distributed set of, if you have a transaction that is distributed across nodes, and out of m nodes, n nodes happen to undergo the transaction, then you want to undo it because the rest of the nodes couldn't do it, then you send the compensating transaction to them. I think the beauty of that compensating transaction model is that you can have the compensating transaction model at a semantic layer. As in, if you have, for example, dispatched a book, you cannot like send a guy to get the book back again to your store. So now probably you have to either debit from the user's account later or push a debit to him or something of that sort. So again, they are pushing the distributedness of the problem to the business layer and the use case layer, rather than trying to solve it at the network and the places where we hit into the CAP theorem and basic consensus protocols and all of those things.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool. Thanks a lot. I think we should get on with the next talk since we have sort of limited time here. Umesh, if I could ask you to stop the screen share and Navdeep to take control.